Hi, my name is Jerry Whiting. I have a small company in Seattle called LeBlanc CNE. I focus on medicinal cannabis, especially CBD-rich strains. To that end, I am the strain guy, the genetics person. I have a large seed bank and have been known to distribute CBD-rich strains, among other things, to growers all throughout the Northwest and other places. I also do formulations, specializing in tinctures and topicals, and I teach, run my mouth, and share what little I know. So today what I'd like to do is do a presentation I call Hacking Cannabis, Do-It-Yourself Kitchen Chemistry. And you may ask why. Well, the simple answer is I firmly believe that healthcare is a right, not a privilege, and that access to money should never be a prerequisite to access for quality healthcare options. And with regard to cannabis, we're in this transition where in some states, in some situations, with some measure of fine print, it's legal. But in terms of going to Walgreens or the food co-op and buying a quality cannabis preparation, we simply aren't there yet. But since here in Washington we are allowed, those of us over 21, to possess an ounce of cannabis, you don't necessarily have to depend upon a 502 store to provide you with the medicine you need. And in fact, I would humbly submit that you not only enjoy lower prices by making your own cannabis-based medicine, but there's a real good chance that it's going to be a better quality product than what you find available in the 502 stores right now. Give us a while and LeBlanc CNE products will be in the rec store near you. So, a bit about my story. So, I have been doing this for 4.5 years. I've been a rec user for 4.5 decades. I work closely with Project CBD. 2 of my 3 kids had seizure disorders, and the middle son, Coleman, approached me for assistance transitioning from big pharma to cannabis for his seizures. Part of the reason was my wife and I have hosted speakers and organizers at HEMPFEST for like 8 years now. But I also used to practice acupuncture, massage, and herbal medicine many moons ago, and it was the reason I moved to Seattle, but I never quite got around to it and fell into high tech. But now I come back to healthcare by working with medical cannabis. So, what I'm going to focus on are the therapeutic attributes, qualities, and techniques used in making medicine. But if your goal is to get really stoned, the same chemistry works the same way. There's nothing wrong with getting stoned. In fact, THC is really good for chronic pain and PTSD and a whole host of other issues. But there are some differences between cannabidiol and tetrahydrocannabinol, and specifically how the decarb process works, how you take the raw plant and do the chemical conversion to make THC from THCA, the acid form, or CBD from CBDA, the acid form. But we'll get to that in a second. So the plant. Our favorite plant has lots of uses. It's been used for food, fuel, fiber, medicine, recreant, spiritual uses for thousands of years all over the world, and with good reason. We have co-evolved with the plant as our nomadic ancestors wandered around in post-glacial periods. They made these temporary encampments, tramping down the native vegetation and leaving waste in their wake. So between trampling down what was growing and leaving garbage, over time, as people wandered around looking, food, hunting, gathering, collecting, the volunteer plant that often sprang up first was hemp. And that was really good for those nomadic folks because the seeds, the hemp seeds, are wonderful food. They're easy to separate from the plant material. They're rich in oil, really good oil, and they store well. Well, as these nomadic people wandered around with their nomadic people food, they dropped more seeds, which of course became a spiral, and when they came back, the year or 3 years or 5 years later, guess what was waiting for them? Dinner, lunch, breakfast. So we have co-evolved with this plant. It's grown all over the world. It's very, very diverse, much like orchids are in terms of the genotype, the DNA, the strains, the cultivars, call them what you will. And I want to, speaking of so that vocabulary, there are terms like genotype talking about the DNA that's in the seed, talking about the genetic material. The phenotype, which is a pack of seeds distributed among the 10 or 12 people here, we all take them home and grow them differently. Some indoors, some outdoors, some under LED light, some under metal halide, some growing organically in a thin soil, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what you're going to have, whether it's zucchini, carrots, or cannabis, the same seeds will come out differently. If we were growing grapes to make wine, the term would be terroir. So that you go somewhere because the soil is full of minerals and the water is just right and the wind comes in, that grape grows that way in this vineyard. If the same grape goes from Yakima to California to Chile to Australia and back to France, all of those wines will taste different, even though genetically it started out the same way. For the purposes of this conversation, let's talk about the chemotype. So when you take seeds or clones, we all plant them different places. While the colors of the flower, the taste may be different. For the purposes of our discussion, we're going to talk about the terpenes and other aromatics and the cannabinoids like CBD and THC. Those profiles, the stuff you get back from the lab results, are the chemotype. So if we're interested in affecting a change in his gut or your shoulder pain or her headaches, really it's the chemistry that dictates how it interacts with our bodies. And so it's simplistic to say, oh, Blue Dream is for headaches and Northern Lights is good for menstrual cramps. Well, maybe, maybe not, you know? I mean, really. But you're going to find conversations in the popular media or bud tenders or those who were just discovering the plant trying to do these, dare I say, simplistic matchups. And it's way more sophisticated, convoluted, and interesting than saying, oh, A is good for 1, B is good for 2, and we all know that C is number 3. So, if you are looking for, let's put it this way, if you find medicine that works for you, ask to see, if you're at a rec store, the lab results. You're going to see, in most cases, a cannabinoid profile. Oh, and I don't mean the numbers on the outside of the package. The numbers that Liquor Cannabis Board forces processors, producer processors, to put on the package are wrong. They're dumb, they're misleading, and they should be for doing that.
So what are we supposed to, when we read that, what are we supposed to conceive from that?
Okay, so one reason that the numbers are prominently displayed is that in the recreational market, more THC often relates to being more stoned and commands a higher price. A little bit more convoluted than that, but growers will goose their cultivation techniques to get high numbers, not just for bragging rights because they won the High Times Cup, but because some customers, I just left Fishtail. I'm a beer nerd. I of course asked the Waitron, much to her confusion, what hops is in here? I know how many international bitter units, IBUs, but I'm a beer nerd. I want to know, and she had to go ask 3 people. It's like, no, I need to know. You know, I'll still drink it, but I need to know. When you go to a rec store, much like this poor Waitron, the bud tender might have 3 people in line behind me, but when I ask to see the lab results, no, I know they're here. That 3-ring notebook you don't understand, go fetch it. No, really, I can wait. And the people behind me can too. So, if you are the kind of person who reads the nutritional panel on the side of food, and I had to go by hemp milk today, and there were two kinds, same manufacturer, and I flipped it over and someone had to go behind me. Why? I wanted to know, which one do I want? They're both organic, but do I want the original or the original unsweetened? So, most lab results that are out now look at 9 cannabinoids and 9 terpenes. So another simplistic understanding is THC is good, THC is bad and CBD is good. THC is just for recreation and CBD is always for medicine. And therefore, if I want all CBD and no THC. Now, I've learned to modulate my response. I don't jump down your throat, and it's an opportunity to educate folks about the finer points. My point is, the more you know about the nutritional stuff on the side of your food packages and about the cannabinoid and terpene profiles about the cannabis you're buying, not only are you a better informed consumer, but you can fine-tune what you're buying to what the desired effect is. So, you're going to see, and you can go look at Analytical 360's website because they list the results for going back years, and pretty pictures. The nice thing is, so the labs use the chromatography. Remember in elementary school, junior high science, you had a paper towel and someone took a felt tip pen and marked a line on the bottom and you stuck it in water and let the water seep up through that felt tip marker, and you realized that the black was really dark blue and some green and everything because the different pigments would separate out as it traveled up the paper towel. So imagine a tall column, imagine a bong, full of a material where you allow the cannabis to travel through and the different components separate out. Simplistic understanding, that's chromatography. Sir?
On the subject of the labs, do you have to actually go to a lab to actually have stuff tested, or is there some kind of homemade method you could actually find out? Or
There's some.
Because I see they're a lot of expensive to take it to the lab, isn't it?
$40 for a potency test and for the cannabinoids, and then another $40, approximately like an analytical, for the terpenes. If what you're buying is in a rec store, it's been tested. If it's a reputable rep store, they will be glad to bring out that 3-ring notebook and show you the results. And I did it the other day at Dockside. There were, and I was curious. I wasn't window shopping. There wasn't a line behind me, but there were 2 or 3 very high CBD strains that I was interested in. The menu listed the total THC and CBD and the price per gram. It appeared to be weighted so that if you wanted to buy more CBD, it was $2 more a gram. But I wanted to do the math real fast and say, so if I'm interested in extracting CBD, what's the cheap option between these two? They have different ratios, but different prices. It's a simple math problem. But also, so first of all, we all know about THC, it gets you stoned. We all know about CBD from Charlotte Figge, Charlotte's Web, Epilepsy Kids, and Colorado Sanjay Gupta show. And people are fixated on the THC-CBD ratio with some reason. But people, in my humble opinion, don't pay enough attention to the terpenes. And so the first thing you do when you get a new piece of pot, you break it, you smell it. You're smelling these terpenes, terpenoids, these aromatics, very volatile. They give strains their characteristics. There are a lot of strains that are 15.2% THC. They are not the same. Why? Because there's 75 to 100 cannabinoids and 150 to 200 terpenes in cannabis. So to look at THC and CBD as the only benchmarks is ignoring what's in the plant. In the same way to say, I'm looking for, to walk into a rec store and say, I have you have a fixed menu on the wall, and it looks like all of the pot that's between 15 and 19.9% THC is $8 a gram. And if I want something 20 to 25, it jumps to $11 a gram. So I want the highest THC I can get at the cheaper price. That may or may not get you more stoned, because the terpenes and those aromatics, those volatiles that are in small amounts, add the character to the experience. And even though the terpenes are, let's say you have, by weight, you might have 1% terpenes, not a whole lot, but it makes a big, big difference. How big a difference, Jerry? Okay, so there's this myth. So I'm an old guy. I just turned 63 a couple weeks ago. Began getting stoned when I was 15. I go back home to Ohio recently with Colombian Gold 72 Pheno. My homies and I got out of high school in 1972. Now the myth is, well, you have to teach your kids about the dangers of marijuana because it's stronger than when you smoked in school. Well, I was given the chromatography report, the cannabinoid and terpene profiles, when someone shared with me a couple of nugs and a couple of clones of Colombian Gold 72 Pheno seeds from a film canister. Now, I've tested it, and other people have as well. It comes in consistently at 16, 17% THC. Nothing to laugh at. Yes, there are things that are in the market that are, 20, 25, 28%. But I'm here to tell you, when I take Colombian Gold back home to Ohio, and my peers open the bag, oh my God, I know, you haven't smelled that for 40 years. And the experience is markedly different than a 25% THC with no terpenes. Why? Because at small amounts, many of the compounds in cannabis are very active. Why do I bring this up? When we talk about making products with cannabis, the core of my technique is a whole plant, full extract, doing everything I can to capture a broad spectrum of those 75 to 100 cannabinoids and 150 to 200 terpenoids. And I'll come back to this. And why is that important? We are blessed here in the Northwest with one of the world's foremost cannabis scientists, Dr. Ethan Russo, lives on Vashon. And Ethan, in '71, I believe, he was a medical director at GW Pharmaceutical over in the UK. And he wrote a paper that described what he calls the entourage effect. That there is a synergetic effect, not from any one or two or even 10 components in cannabis, but acting together, they have this greater than effect. How much greater? He claims that, so the people who say, I want all CBD and no THC, you're a fool. That isn't good medicine, it's a good chemistry experiment. Because Dr. Russo says that a preparation like a heavy CBD preparation with a small amount of THC, that same amount of CBD is 2.5 to 3 times as effective. Yes?
When you say CBD and THC, what's the difference with L-sativa?
Ooh, bring that up later. That's a good one.
I'm just confused because when you're talking about isosativa and indicator.
No, we'll come back to that later in the Q&A. It's I have a different take as to what that means. Botany and effect. So so everything there's certain rules of thumb. I'm a firm believer in the entourage effect, what I sometimes call the cannabis cocktail. Whenever I make a preparation, I take extra care to scoop up everything I can that I want. And the last rule is, okay, so I'm an old school deadhead hippie. I only use ingredients I would serve my own mother at the Thanksgiving dinner table.
Amen to that.
There's no butane in my gravy. There's no isopropyl alcohol in my dressing. Now, the reason it's relevant, And it's less so after dispensaries were shut down and it's now 502 regulated. People were going to Home Depot and buying plumbing and butane and blowing their own BHO, sometimes blowing up their homes in the process, but there was no quality control, to be polite.
Purge?
They weren't the best chemists in the class. And also, I started out by saying that I focus on making medicine for patients. And given that I went to acupuncture school and actually had an office and a real practice in Boston before I came out here, I can honestly say they're patients. They're not customers, they truly are patients. The people who come to me tend to be very, very sick. And they often have compromised immune systems. They have a number of issues going on. The last thing they need is me throwing toxins their way. So again, and I can't emphasize this enough, I only use ingredients I would serve my own mother at the Thanksgiving dinner table. Jerry, what do you use? Well, because I'm the genetics guy for much of the medical strains of these here parts, and I'm a steward of the plant. I march against Monsanto. I don't own shit. So, I tend not to sell genetics, even though I have some of the best in the land. I don't sell genetics, I build relationships. And I believe in a sharing economy, and as do many of my growers. And so before 5052 knocked out dispensaries and medicinal growers who I gave genetics to would bounce back. They would tip their nursery, let's say, knowing that I would take leaves and popcorn and trim, even stem and root, and make medicine and sell enough to pay the bills and buy a beer and give the rest away. So most of the growers grew organically or damn close to. So the idea of Eagle 20 and other pesticides and fertilizers ending up in the medicine was a non-issue. So whenever possible, I encourage you to grow your own organically or seek out things in the channel in the 502 system that are organic. A, because it's good for you and those that you work with, but also because it sends a message through the retail channel. Hey man, I'm not selling your stuff because your competitors grow organically and customers are asking, no, they're demanding organic cannabis. So you can take it back, but I'm not buying any more. Growers will learn. Which is why you see Safeway selling organic foods in bulk, is because people like me grew mammals years ago and just said, I'm not buying that. You can't sell the shit. It ain't gonna happen. So, the primary, solvents. There are 3 solvents we'll focus on today. My favorite is ethanol, Everclear, 190 proof, because nothing we want to extract is water soluble. So having only 5% water in Everclear trumps vodka, and Everclear in Washington State, let alone Oregon, is way cheaper than vodka. The second 2 are oils. Canna butter is great. Clarified butter, ghee, is even better. And the other one that works really well is coconut oil. Why? Well, it gets down to the end of the molecule and its electrical properties vis-a-vis what you're trying to grab. It happens that if you're looking for terpenes and cannabinoids, and I'm going to do a web page one of these days, because ranking the fats, the oils, in their efficiency as a solvent for cannabis preparations. Coconut oil rocks. It also gives you the advantage of either eating it, ingesting it orally, or using it topically. People search in Google for canna butter. I use ghee, I use clarified butter for a couple reasons. Some people have issue with the milk solids, and so by taking that out, it makes those people happy. Also, the milk solids are not a solvent. They get in the way. It's noise in the signal. So the rule of thumb is it takes 1 1/4 sticks of butter to be clarified into 1 stick of ghee. Butter stores well. It's on sale during the holidays. You can put it in the freezer. People people buying it for cookies. You're making cookies, but only after you made can of butter. So watch for it at a co-op near you. So again, ethanol, not isopropyl, not naphtha. Sorry, Rick Simpson. Butter or ghee, and coconut oil. The rule of thumb is, okay, let's take a step back. The plant itself makes the acid forms of our favorite cannabinoids. The reason you can't walk into a garden and eat a bunch of pot, flowers, or leaves and get really, really stoned is that most of the THC is of the acid form THCA. While THCA has some wonderful healing properties, it is not psychoactive. And while CBD does all these wonderful things, the bulk of what the plant makes is CBD acid, not CBD. So the handout I give you lists the steps for decarbing. And here's where the interweb, as free and cheap as it is, will lead you astray. So the first person who walked by the burning bush discovered that cannabis was psychoactive because when that bush burned, THCA was converted to THC. If you went back the next day after you woke up with a hangover and ate that plant, you wouldn't get high. If you burned it, you would. What's going on? Some basic chemistry. The carboxyl group is removed when cannabis is heated. Smoking counts. If you want to make a tincture, coconut oil, what have you, you really don't want to burn it all up, but you do need to convert it. The process is called decarboxylation, decarbing, and the way to do it is in your oven. A glass casserole dish, covered, because you don't want to boil off those terpenes. And I have found a sweet spot in terms of the temperature and the time to do the conversion of the acid forms to the forms that we want. If your goal is to convert THCA to THC, 245 Fahrenheit for 60 to 80 minutes, 60 to 90 minutes. If your goal is to convert CBDA to CBD, 245 degrees Fahrenheit for 90 minutes to 2 hours. So again, this is a thing where, or an instance where CBD and THC are similar yet different, and one of the things is the boiling point is 16 degrees higher for CBD, as I recall, and the decarb time, well, decarbing takes more effort for CBD. Either you do it longer at 245 or for an hour at a higher temperature. I found the sweet spot is 285 degrees. The problem is when you cook it at that temperature, the sugars and starches in the in the plant will caramelize. And I have, you'll see in the slideshow on the website, a before and after picture. While it's better medicine, it tastes horrible, in my humble opinion. If it tastes bad, people won't take it, and no matter how good it is, if they don't take it, they won't get well. So the compromise that I've reached is 245, not 285, because it tastes better, it looks nicer, and people respond to it behaviorally differently. They take the medicine. Again, a covered container, something missing from most instructions on the interweb, because some of the terpenes evaporate at like 137 degrees, so putting it in a 245 oven, you're going to lose what you're going to try to keep. And I mentioned that I take every measure along the way to preserve the terpenes and cannabinoids that are there in the plant and to pull as many of those out. So if my goal is efficiency, cover it up. You'll also find that at the lower temperature, when it's covered, your kitchen smells better. If you have an issue with neighbors, roommates, spouses, what have you, and the odor, if your oven has a timer, do it at 2 in the morning. I lived in a condo building and that was an issue. It worked. So, again, the material in the plant is not psychoactive and it doesn't have active CBD. We need to heat it to convert the acid form to what we're looking for. Once you do, what do you do with it? If you're using top shelf flour because you won the lottery, God bless you, you're lucky. Most of us are looking for trim, popcorn, the stuff that you cut off to make that beautiful looking bud.
Freeze also good.
Yeah, whatever works. The idea is that the plant makes the chemistry we're looking for, little glands called trichomes. Most of the trichomes are on the flower. There's some on that sugary popcorn trim on the outside, those leaves. As you go down the plant, not only does the amount of trichomes decrease, the ratio of the terpenes changes from the top of the plant to the bottom. So you get, even if you were to sift off all the trichomes from flower and the same amount of trichomes from the leaves lower down, the chemistry will be different. It's just a fact of life. Again, if you're in a situation because you're growing or you won the lottery that you can buy what you want, start with the top. If we're making medicine with what we have available, it is still okay. You'd be surprised the miracles you can work with free mason jars and coffee filters, because that's what I do. So, we've gathered good cannabis, we've decarbed it to activate it, and now you're ready to use a solvent. Whether it's ethanol, alcohol, whether it's coconut oil, or whether it's butter, my rule of thumb is a gram of plant material for every ounce of solvent. Obviously, if you did win the lottery and you're using flour, you might back off that gram or add more solvent. If you're using leaves and trim, you'll want to use a little more. But my experience, and I went to a panel once where esteemed authors of cookbooks were on the stage, and when they answered a question, someone said, well, best way to learn is to make small batches. Well, the problem is you grab a couple of grams and a tablespoon of butter and you make a batch and you eat it and you get high. You didn't learn anything because there isn't any more left. So my advice is save your pennies, make a large batch, test it, calibrate it, and figure out how much more or less to take.
It's the way the big boys do it.
It's the way the big boys do it. But everyone wants, or some think, oh, I have a couple of extra grams, or someone gave me a handful of trim, I'll go make some stuff. Well, if it's just for you, fine. If it's recreational, it's easier. If someone is sick, what they really, really want is calibrated medicine. They want either you to tell them how much is in there because you went to the lab, or they want guidelines to tell them how much they should consume. Cannabis is a wonderful plant and it behaves differently in people, and many of us talk about a process we call self-titration. I'm going to give you a cup of butter, and I know that 3/4 of a teaspoon is what I need. Your mileage may vary. When you try it, she found that she really wants a full teaspoon, but you two both agree that it's a tablespoon experience you're after. But you may also discover that when you wake up and that old injury has you stiff as you try to get out of bed, you need more in the morning, but once you begin to move around, you're okay. Or her symptoms get worse after dinner, and she has minimal needs during the day, but she knows that sundown, things flare up, and she ups her dose. Or for no rhyme or reason, every third Thursday it's really bad and you need to double what has been normal the other 20 days. Either way, I can give you guidelines, but it's your own experience and feedback that needs to dictate how much and how often you take it. No one can tell you, we're not selling aspirin in a jar that's the same for everyone. It's a very different experience. It's not one experience, but a multi-dimensional experience. And even if you had XYZ disorder, it's not the same every day, and your need for medicine differs as well. So one of the rules that I pass on, how much should I take? As little as you need to address the symptoms that got you here. Dose and serving size is really a long discussion, but here's some guidelines I share with people. Number one, take as little as you need to address the symptoms at hand. If you can take a half a teaspoon and find relief, there's no need to take more. As Marty points out, he calls it the trickster, in that some of the compounds in cannabis and some cannabis preparations in general are biphasic. Okay? You take some, you get better. You take some more, you feel better, better, better. Well, now you're beginning to feel worse the more you take. But then you go back up again, and you get this wave-like action. And so I know Americans like to think that more is better. It is not the case with cannabis. Not only can I not tell each of the 15 of you what an ideal dose is, and how you will feel taking the 10 milligrams of THC Washington State considers a dose. I also can't tell you how often, how much, in what time of day. It really depends. What I can do is give you guidelines and help sensitize you to the feedback your body gives you, so that you can make those decisions specific to you on that day, at that time of day, with that preparation. So, if you see the lab results, or the medicine you buy is tested, or you buy something and the medicine you make is, you get tested, you have numbers, or the package has numbers for you, where do I start? Well, the state of Washington says that 10 milligrams of THC is a dose. Okay, I can feel 10 milligrams of THC. I much prefer 40, 50 milligrams of THC, and I've been known to consume large amounts when needed. So I had a little PTSD episode this summer, spring, summer, and I needed to consume a bunch of cannabis, and I did. I got through it pretty well. I lost the ability to remember names and faces. I don't give a shit. Thank you. I got out of bed every day. Yes. I figured out I was doing 200 to 400 milligrams a day for the first 5 weeks. I was doing a gram of hash, eating majoon, Arabic medibles, dried fruit, nuts, honey, raw fruit. I was eating a couple of those a day. My son died. In May. All of a sudden. So yeah, I make hash. So I grew up as a hippie. So I like to relive my youth. And so I make dry, pressed keef hash Moroccan style, sometimes charas, Indian style, hand rubbed. At the time, I had a lot of hash. I had a couple ounces of hash. And so I'd smoke almost a gram a day. I would eat a couple of majoon, and I would smoke. And after 5 or 6 weeks, I was able to ratchet that down and function better. But I actually was asking members of the veterans community, is it true? Is this what PT? Honey, you got it. Do it, whatever you need to. But for me, at that time, in that situation, my feedback told me that self-titration for me, and I'm not eating CBD, that I was doing relatively large amounts of THC. Yes?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Based on your experience, that you and I were at a seminar yesterday.
Yes.
Where someone who was a PTSD expert stated her thoughts about cannabis. 2 different ways. I really wanted to ask that question, but didn't get a chance. I don't know if you had an opportunity to follow up. One way she stated that cannabis helps you to forget the trauma. But she also stated, and more frequently so, that cannabis allows you to
Retrain
and relearn the situation. And those are separated by a vast gulf of difference. And we constantly hear about how cannabis makes you lose your mind, be forgettable, this and that and the other.
Uh-huh.
You know what? I've been an accountant my whole freaking life, consuming cannabis,
Yes.
and I haven't misplaced many numbers. Just saying. You know? So I reject the forgetfulness, yet I find it very interesting that maybe someone is beginning to reframe that, and maybe your own experience might give you some enlightenment in relearning the situation. As
I would have to
opposed
relearn
learning
several hundred names, and I feel horrible because it was members of the Canna family, of who I'm blessed to know hundreds of. I walked through HEMPFEST like an idiot savant. I didn't know shit people's names, you know, and I was.
But you look good.
I was looking good, you know, carried myself well. So yes, dude, where's my car? So one theory is that the reason cannabis addresses PTSD is that people are reliving that traumatic experience in some form or another, and or there are triggers that reignite that. The forgetfulness, short-term memory issue, or the part of THC, is therapeutic in that situation because you get in this feedback loop that you can't escape by yourself. And by using cannabis, dude, where's my car? You get past that in a small level every time to the point you can retrain. And I think what she
And it's
meant.
two pieces of the same.
Well, but what was her job description? She's a psychotherapist, so she's the retrainer. So it wasn't people medicating and miraculously on the third puff I was cured. It was part of a therapeutic protocol, and I think she forgot to mention that because that's what she does, and she assumed we were there with her. That's what I heard. But I will state that May 24th, I got a phone call from one of my sons that Coleman had died. I immediately reached for Majun. The community admitted or gave me props yesterday for being functional during that time, and since then, the way I did it was treating myself for PTSD with cannabis. I kind of overdid it.
Mahjong that day.
Oh yeah. Oh, I know.
It was just so shocking to lose one.
But either I overdid it quantitatively as I self-titrated, or, dude, it's just a side effect, and if that was the side effect, it's a price I would gladly pay. But I did do the math in my head driving home one day. I was like, damn, that was a lot. But it was just for a 5 or 6 week period. Anyway, so again, you've chosen good cannabis. You've decarbed it to activate it with the instructions on the handout in the back there, and you've decided to use alcohol, butter, or coconut oil. Let's talk about each of these techniques. So nothing we want is water soluble. On the other hand, because I do this aggressively whole plant technique to shovel and scoop all of these good things up, sometimes I get chlorophyll. Now, I did a podcast about this, about green isn't bad. And you can go listen to the podcast.
Thank you for that.
But here's the deal. I've been vegetarian since the 70s, dude. To tell me that chlorophyll is bad is like, are you kidding me? And most Americans don't eat enough produce to begin with, so if you do capture chlorophyll, what's the harm? Yes, some people have an allergy and they get diarrhea. How many? I mean, it's very, 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 very few people. I think what's really going on is that people who made sloppy preparations scooped up chlorophyll and it turned out green, or they scorched it and it was dark, and the color quality connection was made not necessarily based in science. And so the green stuff gets a bad rap. I'm not sure it's well deserved. So here's how we do tinctures. Everyone thinks they're making Earl Grey tea, and they want to have it warm and soaked long. Ha ha! Okay, here's the deal, dudes. You decarb the cannabis and you put it in the freezer for a couple of hours, because you want to freeze what water is in the plant material and lock it up into ice crystals. You put the Everclear in the freezer at the same time. You put it in a mason jar, a third cannabis, a third Everclear, Shake, 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 shake. How long? 30 seconds to 3 minutes. So when someone tells you to heat it up and let it soak for 2 months, smile, walk away. Because we want to lock the water up, and all the stuff that's water soluble, what we want is soluble in alcohol and oil. And it comes out really easily. It doesn't need 2 weeks. So shake, 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 shake. If you stop and look and the mason jar is clear, you'll see the color start to change. Stop. Coffee filter, strain it, let it sit for 20 minutes. The fine particulate matter will settle to the bottom. Filter it again in a coffee filter, you're done. Because it's an infusion in alcohol, dark bottle, cool place, it'll last for a year. Questions about tinctures? Oh, so how do you take it, Jerry? Because you have 2 options. Okay, so that's the base material. Most people, me not included, find that 190 Everclear under your tongue to be an unpleasant experience. It burns. It works because the tissue in your mouth is very thin and very porous, and it gets into your bloodstream in 3 to 5 minutes. So if you're going to titrate, dropper, swish, swish, swish. Whoa. 1 more. You're done. You've now done the calibration. You've now done the titration. If you eat it, it goes through the liver. It takes longer to be metabolized. It lasts longer if you eat it that way, but there may be anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half, up to 2 hour delay, and that may or may not be acceptable. So what I do is I use vegetable glycerin, kosher organic vegetable glycerin from Zenith Supply at 65th and Roosevelt in Seattle, to cut it 50-50. But then my lab numbers got cut in half. Okay, so now, here's the family jewel secret. I have to shoot you all before you leave. Because I don't want to dilute what I've worked really hard to make strong and potent, if I've got a garden going, I will take fresh flower out of the garden, rinse it off to get the funk off, and then put it in vegetable glycerin for 2 to 4 weeks, shaking it once or twice a day. Now I've infused that vegetable glycerin with terpenes, because they're fresh flowers and haven't been decarbed, or extra decarbed pot, but now it's additive. When I cut the 190 alcohol burn with the vegetable glycerin, my numbers stay consistent because the vegetable glycerin, though it's 2 to 4 weeks back, has been infused as well. So vegetable glycerin is a pretty poor solid. We talked about the polarity of the end of the molecule, the electrical properties. Vegetable glycerin is a very weak solvent, so it takes more than 30 seconds to 3 minutes. But it's well worth it because I give a good friend of mine, Pam Dyer, infused vegetable glycerin, the base ingredient, for her feedback. And she's the juice and raw cannabis queen in these here parts. And I just gave her some last week, as a matter of fact. And it works. And it actually tastes wonderful. It's fruity, it smells great, you want to take the medicine. So that's the tincture thing. Let's switch gears. Let's talk about coconut oil. So coconut oil and canna butter are a little different. If you don't like the strength of the tincture you made, add more cannabis, shake it, and do it again. It's harder to do that with oils. So make it strong, be done with it, because you don't get the second. You can make a second chance. It's messy enough as it is. Just do it right the first time. So coconut oil is the easier of the two. Resist the temptation to finely grind the cannabis into powder if you're using an oil. Why? I mentioned sifting or straining the tincture through coffee filter once, letting it sit for 20 minutes, an hour even, and the fine stuff falls to the bottom, and you strain it through a second coffee filter. You really can't strain oil like that, so don't grind it up into small little part. Oh, the surface area is greater. Yeah, but you're going to end up with this. Just don't do it. Just don't do it. So, crumble it coarsely, add the cannabis and the coconut oil in a pan, bring it slowly. I bought one of those infrared thermometers off of Gizmodo at $12 on Amazon Prime. It's the best play toy. It's fun. You get to go on zapping the cat and seeing how hot it is and nobody gets hurt. But two things in the kitchen. A, making cannabis preparations, but if you make bread and you want to hit the right temperature so the yeast doesn't get killed because it's too hot or languish because you didn't make it warm enough, it hits that middle temperature on the package every time. It's just a trip. Anyway, coconut oil, great solvent. You can eat it, you can use it as a topical. Crumble coarsely, heat it slowly. How? So I never want to screw up because you don't get a second chance, because I didn't win the lottery and cannabis can be expensive and people are waiting for the medicine you're making. I put the coconut oil and the cannabis once again in a mason jar. Detect a theme here? I then put the mason jar in a water bath. I know that the water bath will never get hotter than 212 degrees. It's water. It also modulates the temperature so I don't get things getting too hot too quickly and scorching what I'm trying to preserve. And once you heat the water up, 140 or so, and shake the jar a couple times, turn the heat off. I put the cover on the pan and let it sit in the warm water till the next day. Why pay the gas or electric bill? The water's warm. That's what I want it to be, so that things move around. I don't need to. Anyway, so you will then want to strain I go to the dollar store and I bought over the last couple of years all of these strainers of different sizes. You never go to a store that has every gauge strainer for a cheap price you want all at one time. So whenever you find one, buy one or two. Buy two and give one to her. So I start with the coarse ones, and then I go to, and they're small, but they work really well, and I'm cheap. Coconut oil is healthier than you were led to believe. It's a really good oil, and it tastes great. And I'm here to tell you, nothing is better than coconut oil infused with cannabis with leftover Thai food. I'm telling you, it's really good. So, as a topical, and I would say this is true for any coconut oil preparation. If you're eating it to some degree, but especially as a topical, you want to get what's in the oil on the other side of your skin, right? That's the whole idea of a topical. So, I mentioned that I take just like energy conservation, there's no one thing that cuts 12% off your heating bill. But you start, insulating the windows and the doors and even the electrical outlets and all these little things you do, they're all 3/4 to 1.5% total. In aggregate, you get your 12% saving. So there's all these little things you can do to increase the efficiency of your workflow. If you're going to use the infused coconut oil as a topical, I use soy lecithin, or better yet, sunflower lecithin, and I add just a little bit because the lecithin is what causes the lipids to flip across the cell membrane. So if you want to increase the uptake for a fixed solution in coconut oil, add just a smidgen of lecithin, because some people have an issue with soy. I went online and bought sunflower lecithin just to piss off fewer people. I tend to piss off enough people as it is by default. So how much? If I'm making a cup, I would use a teaspoon. And I got out of the doghouse with my wife when I finally used this Christmas present that she gave me that I didn't like. What was it, Jerry? Well, one of those hand mixers, just one little thing with the button, like a old milkshake thing without the metal thing. I had no need for this until I began to do cannabis medicine, because you really want to emulsify. What you don't want is what you make to separate out into layers. So when you add the soy lecithin to the coconut oil is warm, you add the soy lecithin, in the mason jar of course, and you put that mixer in and you start for a minute on low, a minute on high, another minute on low. It will not separate out when you store it for a year on the shelf. Now, here's the hard one. That's canna butter or ghee, which is really cool. So if back in the day we were chucklehead kids and getting high by eating was kind of unpleasant. Not that the being high was unpleasant. We didn't know any better, and we would take a lid, put it in the blender, make green powder, and add it to a box of Betty Crocker fucking brownie mix.
Oh yeah, we did.
And you're chewing sand, you're chewing stems and seeds. Man, she's gonna work, man, this is just nasty, a little glass of milk. We then learned, I remember, I think it was someone before I moved out here, I did a reconnaissance trip and stayed with a friend. I met friends who had made green cookies doing butter, and it was like a new experience. Here's the deal. Butterfat is a great solvent, and so the milk solids aren't. So that's why I separate out the two. You heat it, they separate out, you take off the milk solids, and you've got ghee, that clear stuff. It has a shelf life, because the milk solids are what causes it to go bad. And ghee can be stored unrefrigerated, though I always store mine refrigerated. Here's the deal. Oil and water don't mix. Agreed? So, you decarb your cannabis, you put it in a pan. You put the ghee or butter in the pan, and then you add water. But Jerry, you said nothing we want is water soluble. Well, yes. So, here's what you do. With your handy infrared thermometer, because you're not using a mason jar for this, the stuff is in the pan. You then slowly bring this mixture up in temperature, and you'll get it to that barely simmering little bubbles thing. Why? Because you have a mechanical action of the water moving the cannabis and the butter around, keeping the cannabis and the solvent in constant motion, in constant contact. The other thing is, yeah, the warm water is going to pull out the stuff you don't want, and it tastes just like bong water. And we all know what that's like. Even Red Bull doesn't make it taste good. So, the way, while we're shaking it with tincture and we're heating it, contact cannabis and coconut oil for the butter part, you do this water trick. And for a better reason. This is the best part. So Jerry, now I got this shit in a pan, what do I do with it? So you strain it out, and the buttery cannabis is in the strainer. You take a teapot of water and rinse that cannabis off to get the rest of the butter off. You then put all of this, looks like sewage mixed with bong water.
Yummy!
Tasty!
Oh yeah, this is fun.
In a bowl. And you put the bowl in the refrigerator. Now, because they don't mix, the oil floats to the surface, and because it's in the refrigerator, it solidifies. And in the morning, you will find a disc of green butter floating on top of the water, and you usually have a couple of forks or whatnot, and you pick this green frisbee up and set it aside, look at that nasty ass water and pitch it, because there's nothing we want that's water soluble. I then kind of flip over that green disc. There are probably some pieces of pot still stuck to it, and it looks kind of funky. So you might want to scrape it off, but don't throw it away. And then you've got this disc of green canna butter. You're done. Now the reason you want to make a lot of it as opposed to lots of small batches, when you get that green disc, you can't wait to scoop up some and see how strong it is. Then you can scale that measurement up to make a dozen cookies, not 13, not 8.5. If everyone wants 7/8 of a teaspoon to make a batch of 15 cookies or whatnot, depends how you cut 3x5 or 4x4, do the math. It takes the guesswork out. It also means that you don't get a bigger dose than he does because it's all homogeneous.
No more hot spots, that's what I call them.
Yeah, those surprises. So the other thing is, while it's straightforward to use this on an English muffin, or again, Thai food, when it comes to using it as an ingredient to cook, you have already decarbed it, and you don't want to heat it any more than you have to. So either a high temperature for a short amount of time, or a low temperature for a long amount of time, but you don't want to heat it twice. Well, Jerry, why don't we just decarb while we bake? Well, that's called guesswork, and they ain't going to work, and you're wasting your time and your money, and you're going to end up full but not stoned, or a big belly but not well. So trying to do two things at once is problematic, shall we say. So again, with butter, coarsely crumbled, in the pan with the butter or the clarified butter, the ghee, add some water. How much? Enough so that you can simmer and everything is in contact because it's just moving around slowly. How long? Now here's where the interweb comes in again. Back in the day when I tried to make green butter, the recipe, Children's Garden of Grass. I'd like to find the book. Do you remember that?
I have it on are you talking about
the book?
Oh, no.
Oh, this was
the album, the comedy album.
Oh, this was one of those early,
Early
late
70s.
Yeah, or late 60s.
Legalization
Yes,
comedy.
yes.
We were so sure legalization was coming.
Around the
way.
corner, any day now. Hold your breath. So they talked about it for like a half an hour to an hour in this rolling boil, but they were using raw cannabis. And it kind of worked, but Mexican dirt weed, you could throw in 2 lids. Well, then you see stuff on the interweb where people use a crock pot for 24 to 36 hours. Now here's my thought. We weren't smart enough to know about decarbing back then. I think someone was doing it for half an hour, fell asleep on the second joint, and the next morning realized the butter was better, and they never did it for an hour again. And when you look at the archival stuff in like the Wayback Machine, at a certain point the interweb oral history changed, and it used to be half an hour to an hour. All of a sudden it's 24, 36 hours. Like, what the hell happened? Oh, you got so high you fell asleep. You didn't throw it out, you tried it, and you got really stoned because you discovered decarbing like the guy with the burning bush. So, if you decarb first, you take the guesswork out and you only have to boil it for 20 to 30 minutes because all you're doing is putting the decarbed cannabis in contact with the solvent long enough to pull the stuff out. So I would take decarbing for, CBD for 2 hours and half an hour in the stove over 36 hours in the crock pot. A, you're going to get consistent results, and B, I think 36 hours is longer than 3 hours. I could be wrong. But I think that's where the change in oral history came about, because we used to do it for, we didn't do it at all, we just put raw potted brownie mix. I don't know, but I knew what we were thinking, we were smart, we didn't know any better. So I think those are the highlights I wanted to cover about the 3 preparations. I'd rather stop and answer questions because I could go on forever. Those that know me, yes.
I have a suggestion. I've sensed a lot of resonance every time we mention that nobody here has won a lottery recently.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak to using byproducts?
Oh.
For instance, I've made decent, no, award-winning, but decent full-blood extract out of BHO leavings.
Oh yeah, So if you have a friend that has a rosin press,
leavings, don't ever throw your vaporizer stuff away. Right?
So here's the only thing. Oh yes, you can. The one thing. So let's clear up another interweb piece of misinformation. We've talked about the conversion of THC-A to THC, CBD-A to CBD. Unless you're a really good chemist, you're not converting CBD to THC or THC to CBD. You can do it, but that's way beyond your kitchen chemistry. But what is often misrepresented online is this idea that THC over time will degrade to CBD. It breaks down into CBN, not CBD. And there's pathways and precursors. You can't just make this shit up. So really, if you store cannabis for a long, long time, the THC will over time break down into CBN. Couch lock. CBN causes that. Oh, dude, let's just call out for food and watch a movie on Netflix. I can't go anywhere. If you have issues with sleep, this is a good thing. But most of us would rather have fresh pot with THC. And then one other thing I'll just mention briefly. If you have the luxury, another reason to save all these little scraps and make larger batches, in general, it's a good thing to have mixed strains as opposed to one single strain unless you know what the hell you're doing. Here's why. If there are all these cannabinoids and all these terpenes, no one strain has all of them. But by mixing 2 or 3 of them, you get a shotgun approach that strain 2 covers the blind spots of strain 1, and both of those make up for what's lacking in number 3. And oftentimes, it's often pragmatic that you just don't have an ounce of XYZ at any one time that you can play with, but you may over time gather up trims, traps, the trash, leaves, what have you, and you end up with a pile. It actually may surprise you because you have inadvertently done a mix. So I mentioned that one of my skills is formulation. I have 3 standard formulations. I do a 1-to-1 CBD to THC, and overwhelmingly THC-centric with some CBD for those using it for cancer, and the inverse, and overwhelmingly CBD with some THC for those looking for seizure and other CBD-like symptom reliefs. In 99% of the cases, I mix strains, even when I'm doing CBD-centric, 1-to-1, or THC-centric. And it's my extrapolation on an entourage effect, this idea that it's all this stuff acts together synergetically. Well, if I have 3 sources of synergetic building blocks, I'm going to end up with a more well-rounded medicine in the end. If my goal is to get stoned, it's not that big a deal, but I'm a firm believer, unless it's a magic strain, that varietals are not necessarily the best medicine for most people. If you have the opportunity with yourself or others to fine-tune things over time. So with Maddie, I have, working with Megan, sort of learned what she needs, guessed and been wrong or right sometimes, but I'm now able, sometimes you can end up being like a compounding chemist. For example, THCA, the raw form of THC. Everyone's got stoner pot. It's virtually free. What's it good for? Well, THCA can be used for restless leg syndrome, for tremors, and for certain epileptics who have auras, or what I call these awake seizures. They aren't grand mal. You're kind of there, but you're totally
Partial
out.
present.
Huh?
Partial present.
Partial present.
Patty Mall?
Petite mal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not quite.
Not quite.
Not quite.
So here's my deal. I had 2 kids with seizures, and same docs, different meds, never the same diagnoses. I believe epilepsy is a constellation of disorders. There's one German measles. There's one whooping cough. Epilepsy's more like headaches. There ain't no one kind of headache. And they can change over time, and my kids, especially Coleman, showed different types of seizures, different times of his life. CBD does address seizures. 1 in 7 patients does not respond to CBD. They tend to respond to THCA, which is good news because it's just taking raw cannabis, not decarbing it, and doing your extraction. So while it's quicker and lazier, it for some people is the medicine of choice. And so self-titration would be a way to find that sweet spot if that's yours. If X didn't work, try Y. If I get these hard cases. I have someone I'm working with now. Brain cancer, botched operation, seizure disorder, and it's just wild. Anyway, she was leaving me voicemails in tears that she couldn't wait for the hour and a half for the tincture to take hold, and she was afraid she'd have to go back to the ER. And my advice to her was, if the hour and a half interval is too long, take half as much twice as often. And that for her was like a revelation. And the second part was, because it's an Everclear tincture, and you're telling me it takes an hour and a half, don't swallow it. Hold it in your mouth, under your tongue, swish it around, and then swallow it. When you do it that way, while the total time the effect is shorter, the liftoff time is 3 to 5 minutes. It doesn't go through the liver, it goes through this very permeable tissue under your tongue, and it's fast. So some preparations are spray you put under your tongue, and the one I'm tackling next is a nasal spray. But the idea is that you don't want it to go through the liver, you don't want it to go through the digestive system. The metabolism is different, and the reason it lasts longer when you eat it, the delta 9 THC is equal to delta 11, which is more psychoactive but smaller amounts, and it lasts longer. So it's a trade-off. If you want to get stoned for a long time for that flight across the country, eat it. If you want to get really buzzed for that short flight to the Bay, smoke your last joint in the parking garage at SeaTac and hop on through TSA. Just saying.